You're listening to JournoCast with Lewis Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics is the best thing I think there is in sports journalism. When I interviewed Mike Tyson, I thought there'd be about 30 PR people there, and there was nobody in this room apart from me and him. He'd had his face tattooed by then, and I wanted to ask him about that. I went and wrote a piece about Simone Biles one night, which is an amazing thing to watch. Kerr, Jakob, Ingebrigtsen rivalry in 2008, which was my first Olympics in Beijing. I ended up in a room with Bolt on his own. I am a living legend, bask in my glory. I mean, I remember playing football once for this media team against Valentino Rossi's fan club, which wasn't a fan club, it was him and his drinking buddies. I remember being in a car with him once and thinking, I wish I wasn't in this car with you. But then just started freelancing for the Times, and I did a little bit of talks sometimes at unis and stuff for journalism students. And I do feel there's a bright future. If you have an idea, there is a way that you can get it out there.
Just talk to me briefly, just first and foremost, Rick, about the Olympics. Like, how was that experience, just being there and being surrounded by so many stories on a day-to-day basis and trying to get copy turned around in such a short period of time?
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics is the best thing I think there is in sports journalism. It's just obviously it only happens once every 4 years, 3 years this time, and just there's a schedule that comes out every day for the main papers. I'm sure they're all the same. They'll get a schedule from whoever's sort of coordinating it, saying what everybody's doing. And for me, the first week is great. It's all over the place. Random sports. I did a bit of rowing. I did Tom Pidcock's sort of comeback in the mountain bike. I went down the fencing because there's a lot of corruption down there, and I thought it was a good story down the fencing, which is an amazing venue in the Grand Palais, which you probably saw. And then the second week, get down the athletics track really and do the athletics for the second week, which is a different sort of vibe in a way, because it's just it's like a major championships within a championships, and it was just brilliant. I mean, you're surrounded by, I think Simon Biles, old colleague on the Times, said it. You're basically seeing people have the best day of their lives, and it's it's sounds a bit trite, but it's actually quite a privilege to be sort of in on it, getting inside ringside seats. So yeah, it's fantastic. Loved it.
Yeah, and so you mentioned at the fencing being a good story. So is it just a case of, on a day-to-day basis, that you using your own, news agenda, is it just a case of find the best stories and go to it, or is that planned ahead? You need to go to this event at this time and this one, and make sure you're obviously at the big ones like the sprints and all the athletics.
I mean, people are trying to we're pretty parochial the way we cover it in Britain, so you're covering off the medals, or the anticipated medals for the Brits. So somebody one day will go and watch the trampolining or something, which you wouldn't normally do, but because there's a British medal there. So that's the way it starts. And then obviously things happen and you react to those. For instance, I didn't actually do the story, but somebody did for us, the the Seine being polluted and all the triathletes getting E. coli or potentially getting E. coli. So, that's a story that I guess somebody would have actually been down the triathlon anyway, because Alex Yee was there. It's a good shout for Britain. But people were going down there more often than they normally would. I'm trying to think of other examples. The fencing was one. I mean, I don't think anybody else would have covered fencing. But I just became aware that there were some sort of dubious things going on especially the American team in the build-up to it, in terms of selection and buying refs or dodgy refs and dodgy umpires, judges, I think is a right phrase in fencing. And so I thought it would be good to go down there and see it. And then that becomes more a newsy feature about all the things that have gone on. And then you can dig into the past as well. Because I knew there's a great story that a brilliant German documentary team had done years ago about Thomas Bach, the IOC president, basically alleging that he had cheated by having a wet glove when he was a fencer, which diffused a sort of scoring system. So, you can bring in all these other stories from the past, and you got to be aware of what's going on and react to things, as well as going to the things that they're on the diary for you to go and do.
Yeah, and how do you stay aware of everything that's going on? Because obviously there is so many different events, so many different athletes, so many different stories, nations, each and every single day. And is that something that you struggle to stay on top of?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, you'd have to say yeah. I think there's quite a lot of bluffing goes on at the Olympics when it comes to journalists being experts in all these sports that they very rarely cover. I mean, really, apart from athletics, there are a few lingering swimming specialists, all the other sports really, maybe cycling as well. But apart from those, all the others are, everyone's thrust into new sports really. I found one of the hardest ones, for instance, I went and wrote a piece about Simone Biles one night, which is an amazing thing to watch. But just knowing the terminology is quite hard. And, how do she's 8 feet in the air or more than that, probably 15 feet in the air, doing a tumble. What do you actually call that? So knowing the terminology is quite hard. And it's always good with all these things to try and work out who the specialists are and go and pluck their knowledge in a very polite way.
Yeah. How does the kind of preparations look going into that? Because obviously you know weeks in advance that you're going to be going to Paris to cover these kind of things, but is it just a case of, the morning of the day, giving yourself a quick refresh, or do you have to spend a good few hours each and every single day being like, as you said, getting the right terminology for things? Because obviously once you get the terminology right, things start to become a bit more natural. So how much time do you have to spend looking at each individual event that you're going to be attending?
Yeah, I mean, a fair bit. I mean, it's a little bit on the hoof sometimes. But for instance, that day I went to watch Tom Pidcock in the mountain bike. I was out with some colleagues, sort of esteemed colleagues, David Walsh, who obviously knows a lot about Tour de France and cycling, and Owen Slot, our chief rider. And we were talking about him. So I'm picking up other people's knowledge. And then they suggested I go and watch the Tour de France Netflix episode, which features him heavily. And I did. And it did form an opinion of him. And then also, there are also things that happen, for instance, especially in that first week of the Olympics, there are loads and loads of Zoom calls with athletes that Team GB put on. So I went on one with Tom Pidcock, and I thought you can tell something about his personality. I think the first question was he pulled out of the Tour de France with COVID. And so the first question, which seemed pretty naturally from somebody else, was, how are you, Tom, after pulling out of the Tour? And he was, the one word answer was fine. And I thought from then, wow, this is going to be a bit of a struggle, and that he's got a bit of an edge, or is quite, can be a bit difficult. And that's the impression I got from other people who know more about it. So yeah, you use other people, use other journalists. I mean, that's the best tool you've got, really.
Yeah, that's the best way to go about it, I suppose. How many hours on average of sleep do you reckon you got per night at the Olympics?
But it's so hot in our hotel, Rory. But really, in terms of the working days are big. I mean, you could, for instance, be up at 7, even earlier, because of travel. You've got to travel to venues, something like the mountain biking, the events that were down in Versailles. It can take you a couple of hours. So you've got to get up early. And you're probably, if you're doing then a track, something like that at the athletics, you're not going to get back from the Stade de France until way after midnight. So it's pretty long, and it's intense. It's immensely huge fun, which is the thing that gets you through it. And you're watching special stuff. But yeah, it's crazy long days, really are.
Yeah, what was that, sorry?
You feel it when you come home, and you just have that sort of, not exactly crash, but you're just on this, it's almost like a bit of a low. I mean, the athletes talk about a post-Olympic slump, and I think journalists get it a little bit as well. Luckily, I'm not being thrust straight back into the Premier League, which some of the other guys would have been, which, that's no rest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it is exactly like that, because you're so flat out each and every day, and then all of a sudden you come back, and it's kind of like it's like coming back from a holiday, to be honest, essentially, but a working holiday. Rick, I read your interview with Julien Alfred. I think it was in Monday's paper. obviously won the 100-meter gold for St. Lucia. And I was just reading it, and some of the quotes were very striking. Like when she got her scholarship in high school in Jamaica, she said, "I wanted to give up but kept pushing because I knew something good would come out of it." And you mentioned about how the Prime Minister of St. Lucia called for a national holiday. And I was just like, it just made me realize like how big an event like the Olympics is. And obviously recently we haven't really sorry, we don't really see these kind of events on TV that often, apart from when the Olympics comes around. But I wanted to ask you and get your opinion on how important do you think these kind of sports are, and the role the Olympics plays in sport. How big do you think it is?
Yeah, I think it's huge. Because the difference is, you can have something like the Euros in the summer, which people get into, but all those people, especially obviously with the big countries that are going to get through to latter stages, are well-known, famous people and probably earning more money than anybody could ever wish to. And it's not like that in Olympic sports. And athletics is the same. I mean, you mentioned Julien. I mean, she's a 100 meters world champion, Olympic champion, silver medal in the 200, and she's obviously not a household name yet. And it's amazing. I actually spoke to Dina Asher-Smith yesterday, and we were talking about her because they trained together. And I was talking to Dina about the sort of pressure of, everybody always expecting her to do well, and it didn't quite go the way she wanted in Paris. And she says it's not pressure. And she mentioned Julien, who says she got a whole country, sort of literally everybody in the country rooting for her, albeit only about 170,000 people. And we said that's more pressure. So yeah, I think that's hugely important, especially for, I get slightly irritated as a journalist that I understand we're in a click-based industry now and everything's done on metrics and what people are reading, but you can't just be football. You can't just cover football. Much as I like football, I think there is so much other good sport out there. You've got to cover it. And it's getting harder and harder because we are click-based, and it's all done on metrics, as I say. So, but I think it's a real shame that if we don't cover those sports. When I started out, every paper would have had an athletics correspondent, for instance, and I'm not sure many do anymore. They have people covering it, but they're not called athletics correspondents. It's not their only job. Everybody does a lot of different sports now, which is good for the journalists because it's variety. But it shows how it's changed. So yeah, I think you've got to cover those sports. Otherwise, for those sports, publicity really matters. For the Premier League, I don't think it really matters if there's any stories in newspapers. It's going to survive. People are going to watch it on TV. But for the other sports, I think it does matter.
Yeah, do you think there can be a shift somewhere to get athletics and all these other events that we've seen at the Olympics on TV more regularly?
Well, it's coming. The way it's becoming now is Netflix, isn't it? It's all these docu-series. It's those sort of things that are really trying to broaden the appeal. And everybody saw what happened with Formula One and Drive to Survive and how it really worked for them. And everybody wants a piece of that, so they're all trying to do it. Some with more success than others. Even golf has done it. You wouldn't think golf would need it, but golf went down that route as well. So that's a way of doing it. But yeah, it's getting personalities. Michael Johnson was a columnist for us while we were out in Paris, and so I was doing a lot of talks with Michael, and his big thing is getting personality, making personalities out of these people, or not actually making them, but showing their personalities, and also getting head-to-heads, getting some sort of narrative throughout the year when it's not Olympic year, and that's always been the hard thing with athletics. Because they'll have something called the Diamond League, but it's not a league because you don't get the same people running it each time. So Michael Johnson's launching a track league, which is literally, there's a lot of money behind it, which is why they're going to do it. But it's literally going to be head-to-heads between the top guys 4 times a year, which is not many. But it's that sort of thing. I think you've got to get people got excited about I think they got excited about the Josh Kerr, Jakob, Ingebrigtsen rivalry,
Yeah.
which was great for journalists, and that was built up throughout the whole summer to that brilliant race when neither of them won in Paris.
That was incredible.
It's a great story, though, for a few months. So if you get a few more of those, I think that would broaden the appeal. And it helps that you got someone like Keely Hodgkinson who's just going to be a star.
Yeah.
So she's got crossover appeal.
Yeah, and just going back to that Julien Alfred story there briefly, it must feel quite good to be able to tell these kind of stories. Just from the basic sense of being able to interview someone. And I think one of the things in the story was she mentioned how hard it had been since her dad passed away in like 10, 11 years ago. And like even when you're on the phone with her and like hearing those kind of words, it must feel pretty empowering to be able to share that with with an audience.
Yeah, it is. It's a privileged position, I think. And the beauty of those other sports is that those stories haven't been told that often, if at all. You can actually find new stories. Whereas obviously in football, rugby, it's harder to get those stories that people don't already know about. So yeah, and it is, empowering is a good word for it, I think. The things you see, I think, are fantastic. I mean, I go back to Tokyo when the journalists all go down to the mix zone, which you'll know is sort of the area down in the stadium where you have to sort of scramble for quotes from athletes as they walk through. And just seeing Dina Asher-Smith come through there and break down in tears and give us a 20-minute monologue about how it had all gone horribly wrong. You realise you're in on someone's, it's like you're intruding on grief almost, but it's fascinating. And I've seen a lot of athletes cry over the last couple of years, last couple of weeks, put it that way, which is not always a nice thing, but it shows the emotion and the what it means, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, and now that you've said about the mix zone, I remember reading your description of the mix zone and all the BO and the sweat and everyone's push along beside each other. And do you enjoy that whole experience?
No. I enjoy the talking to the athletes, and I enjoy the camaraderie amongst journalists and the banter that you get down there. But it's pretty demeaning a lot of the time. I mean, these places literally you're behind barriers. Athletes come through, they will talk to usually the BBC, then the BBC World Service, then BBC whatever website, then probably BBC Worcester, and they go through all these people, and eventually they'll get to the journalists where they're a bit tired of talking by the time they get to you. And you might have within sort of a 6 foot period, 6 foot sort of barrier, probably about 30 journeys crammed in there trying to sort of lean over each other. And so you try and get down there, you try and muscle your way to the front so you can throw in a question. Although I've noticed there's a bad habit started actually in Paris. I think there's a lot of journalists now who have selfie sticks and just throw their phone over the top of everybody else, never ask a question, just record everything, which it's not really the done thing, I don't think. But yeah, it's an interesting place to mix zone. And they're the same the world over. They've never got it right. And there's a lot of hanging around. And at the Olympics, it's hard because you'll watch a race, you'll rush down from your seat, and the Stade de France is a big place, so it's a long way to the mix zone. It's around 6 flights of stairs. You'll get down there, wait for the person to come through. Usually it takes a long time. Meanwhile, there's all these other races going on live outside that you're missing. So it's a balancing act between missing something brilliant live and actually getting the quotes that you want from someone. Yeah. And that's where it comes a bit of teamwork between journalists, I think, and from rival papers that some people pull their weight more than others and help.
So would that be a case of then someone staying to watch the event and sharing, whatever happens, someone going to get quotes and then a bit of a combined effort?
Yeah, it is like that. Although, as I say, some people, and it's usually, to be fair, often the tabloid guys who do more of the donkey work, their stories are probably sometimes more quote-led. So they need the quotes, so they will go, but then they're kind enough to share it. But I think you've got to get down there because you see people, you see their reaction. The quotes can look quite drab in black and white, but you see their reactions and you can see how either elated or choked they are, or, that, for instance, before Ingebrigtsen ran against Josh Kerr, so after the semi-finals in the 1500 meters, I went down to see him, Ingebrigtsen this is, and he was wearing a COVID mask, which, he was the only one I saw all the time wearing a COVID mask. And that's quite interesting because it shows how paranoid he is about picking up something, or it maybe even sows the seed that he's already got something, because there was COVID going around, as it was proved, and he had this mask on, but you wouldn't have known that if you just read the quotes from him. So sometimes you got to go and actually see people physically, and also you want to see them in their moment of despair or joy, really, but yeah, you equally don't want to miss the 100 meters final.
Yeah, and that's such an interesting thing to pick up on, like just the sense of someone wearing a mask can, tell a completely different story just compared to the quotes that they're saying. And I'm sure you get that all the time in the sense of people's body language and, stuff that they wear and, how they approach the interview. And I mean, so many things can tell a story much bigger than it actually is. Rick, I wanted to ask you about interviewing, and I just wanted to explore that area for a wee bit. Do you generally enjoy that process, and like, do you have a go-to method for interviewing? Because I think people, from an outside perspective, would like to hear someone of your experience and how you go about conducting an interview, and the step after that, in terms of transcribing it and getting it turned around. How do you kind of like break that down into when you find the best quotes, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, first thing you do is do a lot of research. So you do a lot of reading around, see what that person has been saying, or past interviews that might just pick up something that you can then take in another direction. But I do enjoy it. And then you'll go and see the person. I never have questions written down. I think it can be off-putting. I think you're trying to sort of have a chat with someone and make it pleasant. And you're not trying to catch them out, but you're trying to make them relax so they'll just open up a bit more. So I'll have themes. I might jot down, just in case I have a total brain fart, some general themes somewhere. Just I can glance at, but I wouldn't have questions. And then, because I think also you've got to react to where the conversation goes. It might go in totally different directions than you expected. But I would also, you try and start soft, try and make it pleasant, try and talk about something probably totally different, just to get some sort of bond with the person, and then carry on, and then see where it goes. You'll have themes in your head that you want to cover, and you'll say to yourself, have I covered everything? Sometimes you come out and think, crikey, I forgot to ask that. But I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, sometimes it depends on the interviewee as well. I mean, if you're talking to someone who can be difficult, and my best example of this was when I interviewed Mike Tyson, and it was after he'd finished, and we had to do it in Paris because he has a rape conviction, so he wasn't even allowed into the UK. But he had a book out, so I went to see him, and I thought, in my head, this could be difficult. He could be a tricky character. So I had an entire interview worked out in my head with questions, but I also had an alternative one. If he was monosyllabic or difficult, I thought this is what I'm going to do to try and get through that. So I had a sort of plan B in my head on that one. I had literally had it all almost worked out, question by question. As it turned out, he wasn't difficult at all. In fact, he was totally opposite. He was as nice as you could get. In fact, I thought there'd be about 30 PR people there, and there was nobody in this room apart from me and him.
Wow.
He had a chair in the middle, and I was sitting about, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet away from him, and he pulled my chair right next to him, literally, so we were about 2 inches apart, and then he just starts slapping my leg and calling me mother effer all the way through this interview, in a I think affectionate way.
That must have been scary.
It was. I mean, by the end of it, it was fine. But it just shows how these things go off in totally random directions that you don't think about. So yeah, that's pretty much how I do it. It's not rocket science. I mean, I think when I started out, I would be a bit more, not as experienced. I would probably write down things and maybe take a notebook in with me, but I don't do that anymore. And then, yeah, the transcribing is the bane of my life, really. But I would just do it. It takes a long time. In fact, who was I doing yesterday? I was transcribing an interview. I've forgotten who it was now. It was an American athlete, and he spoke so quickly that I was rewinding the tape every 20 seconds because it just spoke too quickly. So that's a bane. I mean, people use Otter, things like that. Transcription services.
AI.
Yeah, I mean, it can be useful in the heat of the moment, sort of like when you're on a deadline, but you can't use it. You can use it as a guide, so you could run through it because it's not word for word correct, but you might see something, oh yeah, that's the bit I want, and you'll know where it is in the interview, so you'll fast forward to your tape and get it word for word. So it can be useful like that. It's dangerous if you use them so word for word because they make so many mistakes. But yeah, I'll do that, and then I think you'll remembered, hopefully, from when you come out of an interview, I've got something good, or I can use that. And it doesn't have to be a newsy thing. Sometimes it can be a newsy thing that somebody said. Sometimes it can just be something a bit different. I thought, for instance, like Julien Alfred interview, I thought when she was talking about what it feels like to run, I feel free, I feel unstoppable, worries all disappear, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's a bit philosophical, but it's actually quite nice to hear that sort of thing from an elite sports person. So you have it in your head what the good bits were, and then frame it around there, really. Yeah, sometimes it can be newsier than other times. Sometimes they're just more features and background about a person. You're just trying to give a flavour of who that person is. And yeah, no, I love it. I think it's a great part of the job.
Yeah, and it is really nice to hear people, and I think that's another benefit of the Olympics is when athletes are so open and honest about things, and we've seen right through the Olympics, as you said yourself, there's tiers, and it's not quite like, because sometimes you do get in the Premier League where, because they do so many interviews every week, it does get a bit same old sometimes, but as you said, it was really nice to hear, Julianne speak about those kind of things and be so honest with yourself, Rick. But I just want to go back to the Mike Tyson interview very briefly, because I mean, I was just sitting there picturing that in my head, that you're sitting in a room 1-to-1 with Mike Tyson, and like, do you remember that moment? Do you remember it quite well?
Yeah, very well. Yeah. I remember thinking, I mean, I knew how tall he was, but I remember thinking how short he was. He was still in good nick. I mean, it was probably, I don't know how long, probably 10 years ago, maybe not quite that long. And yeah, and he'd had his face tattooed by then, and I wanted to ask him about that because I couldn't find anything about why he had his tattoo on half his face, pretty much. And I thought I'm going to have to ask him at some point. And so when you've got a question that you're slightly nervous about, you sometimes leave it to close to the end just in case the person gets annoyed or walks out or something. I mean, it wasn't that controversial, but I just asked him about it, and eventually. And he said, I wanted to deface myself because he was so full of self-loathing at the time he had it. And I thought, wow, that's quite powerful. I mean, he's had a lot of mental health issues, Mike Tyson, so that was quite a telling remark, I thought, and I hadn't seen it anywhere else at the time. So I thought that's good. It's nice when you come up with something that you think, I haven't heard that before. Yeah, but that was good. I bet there's a lot. I mean, one of the good examples of how it is different in athletics, and it has changed a bit, is I remember in 2008, which was my first Olympics in Beijing, I went to a nightclub press conference with Usain Bolt, Paolo Nutini, singer, if you know him.
I love Paolo Nutini.
Yeah, no, me too.
Love him.
He was new at the time, and and the chief exec of Puma. So there were these three people on stage, and three very different groups of journalists there. There were the sort of business journalists wanting to talk to the chief exec of Puma about profits and plans. There were a few sort of entertainment people wanting to talk to this new Scottish singer. And there was Usain Bolt. And there were two things I remember about that press conference. So Paolo had got his single New Shoes out. You might know it then.
Oh, what? I love that song.
So anyway, so somebody in the audience, a Chinese journalist, put a hand up and said, Paolo, what is your song New Shoes about? And I just always remember him just shrugging on this stage and going, shoes? Just shoes, really? And I thought that was quite nice. And then the other thing I remember is afterwards, I don't know how this happened actually, I wish I could remember, but I ended up in a room with Bolt on his own. I think we were waiting for his agent or something. And he showed me the gold spikes he was going to use. He said, I'm going to run in these in the Olympics, and he had his gold spikes with him. But that was nice. It was very rare you had time on your own with Bolt after that. Although I do, he's my favourite, one of my favourite two sports people I've ever interviewed.
Bolt is?
Yeah, and just so much charisma, personality. One of the best things I've seen in journalism was at the London Olympics. He'd always said he wanted to back up, do the 100 metres, 200 metres. He won that in Beijing. He said, I won't be a legend until I do it again. So he did it in London. And he does this press conference, and it's usual knockabout stuff about eating chicken nuggets and loving Man United and all that sort of stuff. And then all these journalists file out, and there's hundreds. I mean, it's a huge thing. There's probably 200, 300 journalists all file out of this room. And Bolt puts his hand up and says, oh no, I got something else. I have one more announcement to make. And so everybody looks at each other and files back in. It takes ages. Sits down again and think, is he going to retire? Or what's he going to announce? By the time the last person sits down, he just leans back in his chair and goes, I am a living legend, bask in my glory. And then walked out. And I thought that was just one of the best things I've ever seen.
Wow, that is brilliant. And you said he's one of your two favourite interviews of all time. Who's the other one?
Valentino Rossi. Do you know of him?
Yeah.
I mean, so he was, people who don't know, brilliant motorcycle rider. But again, it was the personality he had. I mean, I got to know him a little bit through friends who worked for the in-house sort of media team covering MotoGP. And I used to cover it a bit in the days when newspapers would censor things like that. And his extraordinary stories. I remember playing football once for this media team against Valentino Rossi's fan club, which wasn't a fan club. It was him and his drinking buddies from home in this little town. And he just turned up at midnight. This is the day before the Italian Grand Prix, which is quite big because he's Italian. And he turned up at midnight, gets out of the car. We play 90 minutes match. He scores twice. And then he blazes off with dust flying everywhere in his car at about 2 a.m. and gets up the next day and qualifies. It was qualifying for the Italian Grand Prix. But then also things like there's another one where he just didn't go to this Chinese it was a Chinese Grand Prix, the first ever Grand Prix. It was a big deal because he was riding for Yamaha, and all the Yamaha dealers in China had come to basically be waved at by Valentino Rossi at this do the night before the race. And he sent a message saying he couldn't do it. He couldn't possibly do it the night before a Grand Prix. And everybody's really disappointed. And I had this related to me by a friend who was the PR for the Yamaha team, that they went out to console themselves, and all the top brass of Yamaha, highfalutin execs. And at 3 a.m, Rossi and his entourage burst into this bar, sort of like, da-da, and then just saw who was there, and they went, oh no. And he sort of shrugged in the way he did quite charmingly and was forgiven. And then, you can guess, got up the next morning and won the Chinese Grand Prix. He's just a phenomenal figure. And in terms of interviews, you go and get 10 minutes with him on a Thursday before the Sunday race. But if you knew what you're doing, you could do a lot with those 10 minutes. And again, I remember talking to him about Johnny Cash in one of these things for a long time. And then that seeped into sort of Ring of Fire. And that reminded him of a story about when some riders had gone into a field and set fire to something and danced inside this ring of fire. It just went in all different directions. But he had so much character and personality and was brilliant.
Mm.
So yeah, he was fantastic.
What would you say your kind of favorite moment was being at Paris?
Favorite moment was, I mean, this is purely sporting, but my favorite moment was Sydney McLaughlin breaking 400 meters world record, just because it felt like, I mean, it's only the hurdles, so it's not the 100 meters, so it's not a really sexy event in a way, but I just thought it was astonishing how that was one of those duels. She was meant to be running against Femke Bol, this brilliant Dutch athlete, and she wasn't running against her. She absolutely destroyed her, and won by so far. It was unbelievable. And there weren't many world records. I might have been the only one on the track, apart from the mixed relay. So it was special. And talking to Michael Johnson about him, and he said he thought it was the best run he'd ever seen, which I thought, wow, that's quite something coming from him in any race. And judging that's quite hard. What's the biggest? Because some of it comes down to the event. You know, the 100 meters is always special. Or it was definitely special when Bolt was running it. But I thought that was an incredible moment. I also thought, again, this comes back. This is part of the joy of journalism. The women's quad in the rowing I went to, and I'd gone to do a film stroke interview with Georgie Brayshaw, one of the members of that quartet, in the summer, and she's got an amazing story. I mean, she's a really nice person, very bubbly. She's from Leeds, like I am, so that was another bond. And she'd been paralysed when she was 15 after falling off a horse. Told she'd never walk again. That she'd never even feed herself again. Parents were told. Anyway, she obviously did all that, and then she became a rower. And so you'd had this time with her and got to know her a little bit briefly on and told her story. And then you go and watch her actually doing it. And that race was in doubt until the last stroke. In fact, they were probably losing for 1,998 meters of a 2,000 meter race, and then they got it on literally the last stroke. That was amazing. So that was a lovely moment, especially. And then the stories came out after that as well. One of her teammates, Lola Anderson, I don't know if you remember this story, but it was a good one in that she'd written when she was a teenager, I want to go to the Olympics. And then she tore it out and put it in a bin because she was a teenage girl and racked with insecurities and thought, why am I doing that? And her dad had plucked it out and
her dad gave it back.
Gave it back to her 7 years later when he was in the last throes of cancer. And so obviously she was talking about that, and it's another one, another athlete who broke down in tears. While talking to journalists. But that was a lovely moment seeing them do. When you sort of know something about someone, and then you see them do something good, it makes it a bit more special. So I think those two were my highlights. But there were lots. I mean, a lot of the things I didn't go to as well. Alex Yee was another one. I'd spent some time with Alex Yee, but I didn't go and cover the triathlon. But I was pleased to see him win because he's just a nice bloke.
Yeah, that rowing was just incredible. I remember I actually missed the end, but then I remember going on and watching the highlights, and I think there was actually a girl part of the team where I come from in Northern Ireland that was on that team. Yeah,
it's a lot of fun. Anna Scott.
What's her name? Hannah Scott, that's the one, yeah. And they were great in all the interviews. They were really good, bubbly, as you said, and very energetic.
Yeah, no, they're all nice in their own ways. I mean, it really was a team, that one. But yes, when you do see these rows, because they bring them out in teams, and sometimes when it's the 8, and it's chaos because obviously there's 8 people, and with all due respect, sometimes you don't know which way is the one you want to speak to.
You just say something and hope
there's a few casual Tom's thrown in there and hoping that Tom bites, because then that's where the lack of knowledge is exposed a bit. But yeah, that was a good day. But there was stuff happening everywhere. I mean,
yeah, and Rick, one of the fundamentals of journalism obviously is storytelling, and as we've already discussed, storytelling is such a huge part of the Olympics. But I just wanted to kind of go back for you, towards the start of your career, and what was the idea of telling stories and journalism, was that something that you'd always wanted to be a part of, or when did that come about?
No, not particularly. I mean, I did like telling stories at school, writing stories. Journalism, not so much. Basically, I did it the old-fashioned way. Did English at university, and then was pretty much told, with an English degree, you can go into publishing, teaching, or journalism. And I don't know, I went for journalism. There wasn't a huge amount of thought went into it, and to be honest, it wasn't great to start with, because I did news journalism. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy knocking on the door of someone whose daughter had died in a car crash and trying to get a photograph of them and things like that. I thought, this is not for me.
That is crazy.
Wasn't cutthroat enough for that side of it. Not that it's all like that, but some of it was. And then gravitated to sport, and this is in the local papers in Chester Chronicle, which was only a weekly paper. Then I moved to Leicester, which was a big regional paper, selling a phenomenal amount of papers compared to what a lot of the nationals do now. It's been decimated now, like most regional papers, but it was a great paper with an incredible array of oddballs and mavericks and eccentrics. And it was a day when people would go to the pub at 1 o'clock and come back at 3. That was a daily thing. It was a bit of an eye opener, but all good grounding. And so it was like that. And then I started freelancing for the Times, but it was different, because still in those days when I started at Times and I was doing mainly football to start with, you're phoning it all down a landline. You're phoning your reports down. Nobody had laptops. So you're literally on the phone to the copy takers, trying to sort of scream over.
So you're literally saying your story word for word to someone at the other end who's typing it up.
That's how it worked, and you do it in 3 bits. So you'd ring them up at half time, give them a bit, then you'd have to ring them, do the intro at the end. So if something happened, I mean, it's the same now in football. If something happens late in a game and an evening game, then it's chaos for the journalists. But it was harder then, when you had to then ring them back up. And
you were writing all this down?
Yeah, I did. Some people could do it off the top of their head, but I couldn't.
I certainly couldn't.
I think I'm told that Steve Jones at the Sunday Times still has his own copy taker.
I heard that as well.
Which I find not amazing, because having met him, but it is a staggering thing that somebody would have that. But you get all that. That's where all those sort of famous faux pas supposedly came. Some of them true, some not. Like one about a Welsh football match where Ian Rush and Mark Hughes were playing up front, and it ended up in the paper as Russian Jews were on the attack or something, and those sort of things. And there's lots of famous examples like that. And I say some of them are true and some are probably made up, but you did leave yourself open. So it was different times. But then just started freelancing for the Times, and eventually, after a couple of years, managed to... Well, actually, I'll tell you what happened. I remember Keith Blackmore, the old editor, saying, "Do you know this bloke Carl Fogarty, who was a motorbike race? He had just won, I don't know, his 4th world title or something." And I didn't know anything about motorbike racing at all, but said I did, because I thought it'd probably be a good thing to say you do. And before you knew it, you're getting sent off to races. I mean, we went to Australia and Japan, and it was crazy. And I think that helped my way in by just being versatile. I think that'd be my advice to anyone: just say yes.
Yeah.
to
Uh,
that you get.
I mean, that's some way in being sent to Australia and Japan, as a freelancer. And the funny thing is, I'm showing my age here. I would only know Carl Fogarty from because he won I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. That's
I think,
that's the first thing that rings a bell with me. But
I think I ended up writing a piece after that about the Carl I know sort of type thing. But I had got to know him actually after that, and he had some quite. He was quite off the wall. I remember being in a car with him once and thinking, I wish I wasn't in this car with you, because he was driving like insane lunatic.
He's driving like he does on the track.
Yeah, but no, it's
Rick, what was that like? At those early stages when you're breaking through, and obviously it is quite hard as a freelancer, and you've got a lot. You're trying to juggle a lot of things, and there's a lot more than just the work that you have to do. Everything on the side, it's part and parcel of the job, which is why we love it. But what was it like at those early stages? And can you remember any thoughts from back then? You're trying to break your way through.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. I mean, I think I was a little bit older than a lot of people who break in. I mean, I'm probably 30 or something by when I got on the Times and just had a baby. So it's quite a big gambles to do certain things. So should you just stick with a low paid but regular income on the Leicester Mercury, for instance? But you knew you had to go for it. And I was quite lucky because Keith Blackmore at the Times was good to me and just basically said, we'll give you enough to get to this sort of level. It wasn't quite as freelancing as a lot of people having to ring up various editors each week. I had a sort of steady flow of stuff coming from the Times. And then there were a few things that were fortuitous, like Peter Taylor just became the England manager very briefly. And I kind of knew Peter from working on the Leicester Mercury because he'd been the Leicester manager. So I managed to get an interview with him, and things like that helped. And so, yeah, I think if you're decent and hardworking and you can get on with people, then you got a good chance of getting somewhere. But yeah, freelancing is hard, and I know a lot of friends coming out the other end who've lost their job who are trying to freelance again now, and it's not easy. But if you're young, you've got a bit more energy, haven't you?
Yeah. And you touched on earlier, Rick, you talked about regional papers, being decimated, and you talked about, clickbaity stories and stuff like that. I just want to get your kind of general thoughts on paid journalism, because I spoke to Alison Rudden, she said it, and I agree, it is important to have somewhere where the stuff that you're reading is true and you can rely on it. And social media these days, obviously, yourself, there is so much stuff on Twitter that goes about, and you just see it and it's like, I can't believe that. And media places do kind of frame their stories now to be just get that initial click. What's your thoughts on social media and that kind of side of journalism?
Well, if I was honest, I'd wish it didn't exist. But it does, and it's the world you're in. I think it's a bit depressing, actually. I mean, you can try and put a spin on it, but if stories are all click-based, and if you're going to end up having league tables about which stories are most read, and then it's not hard to see that the guys covering Man City will probably be top of the table, and the guys covering, I don't know, athletics, those other sports are going to be lower down, and that's not necessarily a reflection on quality, obviously. I think it's really important if papers like the Times retain their sort of status, then they need to think a bit broader. Well, not think broader, but be, as they are, still covering other things and covering them well. I think it's hard, though. It's a balancing act for the guys in the office, because they've got to make it work as a business. And but I still think this is going to probably be against everything that they talk about in all the blue sky meetings and all those sort of things. But I don't think you can give people what they want all the time. Because if you did, you'd just have, it'd just be like social media.
Everyone would read you, yeah.
Exactly. You need to give people things they didn't realize they do want. And then they read and think, yeah, I enjoyed that. That was different. But they wouldn't have gone out actively seeking that story. But it is hard. I mean, for instance, Julien Alfred piece that you mentioned, I mean, that didn't get a huge amount of comments on it at the bottom of the story, which is a way of gauging how read it is compared to, the latest story about Chelsea being useless, something. And obviously opinion pieces will always invite people to comment because the idea is to provoke a response, which is not always the way with a feature. You're just trying to tell something interesting. So yeah, it's a tricky situation. I think the industry's in. I hope that there's a way forward, and I mean, print is obviously dying and will go at some point. I don't know how long, about 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, whatever people are saying now. I think the paper will go altogether and it'll just be online. But will definitely change on the times. The attitude was always paper first, digi second.
Yeah.
And it's radically turned around. It's radically turned around.
Has that ever been discussed in the workplace?
Yeah.
Journalism, and I mean, I think that would be a real shame, and I think you're right as well. It just seems like a natural thing with where the world's going, that papers will eventually die out, which is such a shame because you've got books and stuff like that, but it will become all digitalized. And like, what kind of conversations have you had around that?
Yeah, I think people are just realistic about it now, and that's the way it's going. And in some ways, it takes a lot of paper to make newspapers, so it's clearly not sustainable and not particularly environmentally friendly. So yeah, I think people are realistic now. But I mean, obviously there is a thrill to picking up a paper and seeing a nice spread with a nice big picture. And
yeah, I mean, I've got the game right here in front of me, and look at that. That's incredible.
That's what I mean. But journalists have egos, and they want to see their names in the paper and stuff. It's not really quite the same sometimes seeing it in a small article online. But that's just
I've actually got your piece here with
Julien. Yeah.
Like, you just can't beat, like, as you said, seeing it in front of you. It is a real. I mean, I've had my name, and luckily enough to have my name in the Sunday Times a couple of times, and
yeah,
I'm sure you feel the same every time. It just is a real thrill to see it there, and just to have that hard copy in front of you.
But I also think, I mean, there's lots of things that change with just the way that people live, and with commuting. I mean, a lot of the Times sales were was commuters, and there probably aren't as many people commuting anymore because from work from home has become a thing.
Yeah.
So, they might still want to read it on their phone, but they're not going to sort of go out and buy a newspaper. So I think that's just the way it is. That's on its way out, and you've got to accept that. But yeah, obviously, anyone who's worked in it for a reasonable amount of time, there's a sense of sadness with that. Yeah,
I know it is such a fascinating industry because it's really trying to find that balance of, like, preparing for the future, but trying to keep the past as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think and I did a little bit of talks sometimes at unis and stuff for journalism students, and I do feel there's a bright future for people going into it, and in some ways brighter, because obviously when old timers started, there was no internet, so literally, there were not many jobs, and there was whatever there were, 10 newspapers, 10 national newspapers. There's not a huge amount of jobs to go around, so there's obviously a lot more opportunities now, and it's brilliant, everything you're doing. I mean, the fact that people can do a podcast, come up with an idea and go with it, it's brilliant. I think that's a fantastic thing, that if you have an idea, there is a way that you can get it out there really quick. Obviously making it into a business is harder, but but I think it's a sad time in a lot of ways because you do see a lot of redundancies, but another way, I think there are still a lot of opportunities, and people will always want to read well-written articles rather than just Well, I say people will. I'm trying to think about my kids. They probably would never buy a newspaper in their lives. So maybe they don't.
Oh, Rick, just to finish off, next Olympics in LA, there's been discussions about some of the sports being involved. Obviously, we had breakdancing making its debut in Paris. And what do you think about these new sports? I also heard boxing might not be a thing at the next Olympics. How important do you think it is to keep those, because there's got to be boxing in the Olympics, like, surely?
Yeah, I would say boxing's got to stay. I mean, boxing's got problems because its governing body's been corrupt. And
there's been a few stories about boxing in the Olympics, hasn't there?
Exactly. It's made it a rod for its own back. But yeah, historically, I think it's got to be there. Some of these, I mean, I'm not an old fuddy in that. I don't think any of these new sports should come in. For instance, a lot of climbing was really good. Breaking, I think that's stupid.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it. Esports, I don't get how. I mean, I get that it's a big thing and people like it, and it takes a lot of skill, but I don't think it should be the Olympics. Squash should be at the Olympics.
Yeah,
he's going to be at the Olympics. I mean, that to me has been one of the most glaring omissions for decades. Why squash wasn't at the Olympics?
Flag football at the next Olympics as well.
Football, I could take or leave football. Seems. I mean, it's interesting, that one, because people talk about those sports like tennis, golf, football. They've obviously got their own pinnacles outside the Olympics. Yeah. But then you see how much it means to people like Djokovic and Andy Murray. And it was really good fun. I went to Roland Garros a few days, and there's great stories down there. Nadal playing with Alcaraz, Murray saving his career and then ending it.
And DuPont as well with the rugby, taking the title out of the Six Nations just to get the gold medal.
Sometimes they do work. So, and even golf, I think, is coming around to it. And so it's tricky to sort of say what should be in and what shouldn't be in, but I think it comes down to personal choice. And there are enough sort of real sports, you don't need to scratch around for things like breaking. I think don't get that. Skateboarding and everything like that has been really good. The BMX, all that, it's been really good additions. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that come and go. I mean, they used to shoot pigeons, didn't they, and things like that. So probably should bring that one.
Rick, just to finish up, I have to ask you about the football season. Obviously, it just kicked off there at the weekend, and the sort of inevitability around Man City and their 115 alleged charges. Mm-hmm. Surely something happens with them this season.
Well, surely something should happen this season. Yeah, I don't know. I get totally disillusioned with the Premier League. I mean, I'm a Leeds fan, so it passes me by. But I hate so much about football. I love football, but I hate the fact that a team like Leeds, they have a player like Archie Gray who wants to stay at the club. His whole family have played for the club. He's committed to the club, and they have to sell him. He goes to Tottenham. First game he plays for Tottenham, I watched. I thought he did okay. But the Twitter feeds are all, Archie Gray's not good enough for Tottenham, I think. So they've taken a player that we really wanted, and they don't want him. He'll probably end up sitting on the bench for half the season, like Man City killed Calvin Phillips' career.
Yeah.
I just think there's so many things wrong with football. I hate the way it's covered on TV. I hate the fact it's always about the refereeing decisions, which no other sport does. The sport just hones in on the refereeing decisions. I hate the imbalance of it, that Guardiola I'm sure he's a brilliant coach, but, how can you possibly judge him against Brentford manager or Bournemouth's manager? It's madness. It's overhyped, overpaid, obviously. I just so much I dislike about it. And Man City should be docked points, if not more. Leicester should be docked points. I don't know how they're allowed to be promoted. And that is bias from a Leeds point of view. But it seemed madness to me that they weren't just docked points like other teams have been, like Everton were.
That is weird when you think about it. How if they're going to get dock points this season for previous actions, and they wouldn't have got promoted if that was the case, you know?
Nolly. Yeah. I hate the disrespect to referees. I hate the coaches' disrespect to referees. The ranting, the raving, the blaming, always blaming someone. There's no accountability from managers. Yeah, there's so much I dislike about it, but I'll watch probably 100 games this season.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's always so much hatred towards everything in football, but yeah, it's what we watch, you know, week in, week out. But Rick, you know, I came back from the Olympics, which is, as someone in the office said, you've just been chasing around Disneyland for two weeks, which it feels like. And then the first thing I do when I come home is watch Leeds play West Brom on TV, and it's 0-0, and the most mind-numbing thing I've watched for the summer. It's back to reality. That's what it's like, back to reality. Yeah. Rick, honestly, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today. I thought that was brilliant, and I just can't get that picture of you and Mike Tyson sitting one-on-one with each other in a room, and I think that is an incredible story. But I really appreciate your time today.
No worries.